Started in just a minute. But welcome, happy Friday. I don't know how it is where you all are, but it's super rainy and gross in DC. So this is like the perfect thing to do on a rainy Friday is this book event. Okay. All right, it looks like people are slowly trickling in. So we'll get started and just let everyone fill in as we go. But hello, my name is Brittany Kerfoot. I'm the director of events at Politics and Prose, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's P&P Live event with Lisa Taddeo and Raven Leilani. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items. First, we will be dropping a link in the chat where you can purchase Lisa's new book, Animal, as well as the paperback version of Raven's book, Luster. These will go directly to P&P's website, and we ship to anywhere in the US, as well as offer in-store pickup for those of you in the DC area. I feel like I should also mention that the P&P member sale just started today. So if you have a membership with Politics and Prose, you get 20% off pretty much every item we carry. And that includes both of tonight's books. And it counts for online purchases and in-store. And the sale is over on Sunday evening. So make sure you get your orders in before that. Next, if you have a question for either one of our authors, submit it in the Q&A space. If you're on your laptop, it's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I believe on iPad, it's at the top. And we will get to as many of those questions in the later portion of the event as we can. Okay, I am thrilled to introduce today's program as these books are two of my favorite reads from the last several years. And I was thoroughly obsessed with Three Women, and I made everyone I knew read it when it first came out a couple years ago. And with Animal, Taddeo has created a whole new beast, pun intended, a depiction of female rage that is raw and visceral and oftentimes violent, but from which you cannot turn away. Raven Leilani's novel, Luster, explores anger and loneliness in a similar way, where we find the protagonist at a vital point in her life, grappling with the damning effects of modern capitalism, along with the complications of intimacy and race and power imbalances. Both of these books challenge the notion of female domesticity and complicity and are paving the way, I think, for a new literary reckoning for women who have, quite frankly, had enough. So now, without further ado, please welcome Lisa Taddeo and Raven Leilani onto your screens. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi.
This could not be a better pairing, honestly. I feel like both of your books are like so perfectly tied in terms of theme, and they just like fit together perfectly. So I'm so excited to have you both here.
Thank you. I'm so
super excited to be here. Actually, I used to live in Alexandria, so Politics and Prose is a place I would go a lot. And the last event I think I saw there was Mark Danielewski reading from his newest book. So I have like a very solid memory of the last reading I saw there. So thank you, Brittany, and thank you for having us.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So for those who have not read your books yet, I know that people have like read the publisher copy and all of that stuff, but I always am curious for authors to say what they feel the heart of their book is, like in your eyes, because once a book is with a reader, it's really up to them to kind of decide what they take from it and how they interpret it. But if you could kind of like summarize both each of your books yourself, what would you say?
Raven.
I would say that it's weird that it's still like a hard thing to articulate, but I would say it's about a young Black woman who's sort of trying to carve out the space and the right to make art and to kind of seek out intimacy in all the forms it takes. You know, I think for me, it was a journey about art, but also about the carnal and about sort of presenting that in a way that felt true and abject and exciting.
That's perfect. That's what I would say if I were that eloquent.
Animal is about a woman named Joan who, after a straw breaks the camel's back in her life, and she goes on this journey to find some it's a story of finding memory and coming upon rage, and rage sort of bringing her into a profound place of hope.
Yeah, and just both of you saying that, yeah, I feel like there are so many shared themes with you. And I read, let me pull it up because I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there was a review that says, so there was a review in the New Yorker, and it was actually a review of Luster, but Alexander Schwartz, the reviewer, said, during the heat of the MeToo movement, it was often said that young women wield their own power over older men. This is undoubtedly true, as Edie knows. The trouble is that such power quickly expires and tends to leave the woman the poorer for having spent it. And I'm so interested in the power dynamics of each of your characters' relationships. Like at first blush, you would think that both of the men that they're involved with have the power. They're older, they're wealthier, they're married. And in Edie's case, there's the issue of race. He's white and she's Black. But I would love if you would talk about like where your books each fit into this current, for lack of a better phrase, post-Me Too space, and what you feel like your characters represent in the society that we're living in now.
I mean, I would say that as I was starting, that was sort of the, primary relationship where, it sort of segues into a more like complicated and I thought more interesting relationship between Edie and like the two women in the book. But that first sort of point where I kind of introduce her as a character, it was important that she be introduced through her body, through her need, and through this kind of imbalance that exists between them, which is steep, like you mentioned. He's much older, he's much more established, he's white, so their union cannot be kind of like untethered from a very dark history in our country. But I wanted to talk also about the kind of like the salvation of annihilation, the kind of surrender to power, and that too is muddied by like their kind of identities. But I wanted the body and the desire to be forward. I wanted this Black woman to have the right to assert that agency without being hampered by these ideas of perhaps what her politics should be. I feel like I wanted her body to be central, and I wanted that id to be forward. But you're right, it does have, or I guess Alexandra was right, it does have an expiration date, and she kind of is slowly moving toward this this understanding of herself, this idea that she's sort of cobbled together new gods from from human people who will inevitably let her down, who are also kind of dealing with their proximity to death, which is a huge, I think, component of that relationship. And through that, as she sort of moves to that expiration date and feels her power and her worth, and it was my job felt that that I couldn't be guiding the reader necessarily to a conclusion about like the goodness or badness of this relationship, but the way that you evolve through the people who you love and who you fuck.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, for me, in terms of where Animal sits in the post Me Too movement, I feel that one of the sort of downsides of Me Too has been that we've been talking a lot to men about what we don't want, but less so amongst each other about what we do want. And I felt that a lot with the press I did in Three Women. Although Animal was kind of, it's more for me, it's like, this woman has anger, but it's not even really against men. I mean, men are the sort of victims, and they're kind of like the people who happen to be in her way. But the real thing for her is what the way that she grew up and how she was raised, and the sort of first injustices done unto her by her parents, which is really, I'm probably more interested in that as being the, the thing that sparks the way that obviously that is gendered if we have, a mother and a father in a sort of traditional upbringing in that way, then, it is gendered, but that is, that to me is more, it's more anger at the way at the deck of at the hand she was dealt.
Yeah, and I feel like both of these characters are very real, but they're also very flawed. And they're a lot alike, but they're lost and they're broke and they're oftentimes they're very alone, which I think is different than lonely, but I think both of them, that kind of goes back and forth. And in fact, like sometimes they can both be kind of unlikable, right? I mean, that's human nature. All of us are unlikable at times. And I love that part is in there, that they're not these women that you are constantly rooting for, or women that you constantly like, or even want to go get a cocktail with. It makes them really real. And I would love for you to talk about writing these characters as your protagonists, and like what these women really mean to you and how you made them so three-dimensional.
Sure. I mean, I think that likability is a trap and also a distraction. As I write, I wanted to write toward, I just feel like human is often a word that's coming out of my mouth, but I do think, you mentioned loneliness. There's always a context around, a human being. And so whether or not they are kind of palatable feels like less of what you're writing toward, rather than what is the context that built this person that way. And back to the loneliness, I do think that both of our books tackle these topics that that kind of distort the psyche. They make loneliness is a thing that sort of warps your, all the sort of social impulses that would make a person likable, right? And I think that is ugly to look at directly, but I think it's important. It's ugly to look at directly, but also it's to offer your loneliness to another person is like one of the most vulnerable things you can do. I think in general, we have entire industries built on, the evasion of loneliness. So to have a hyper focus on it, I think the portrait is always going to be a little ugly. But the most interesting part is why is this person adrift? And in Lisa's book, I really relished those details as it sort of came together, and you got to see, what put Joan in this desert. I mean, sort of metaphorically and like literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that whenever someone says like, oh, wow, that was risky to have an unlikable narrator, I'm always like, oh, I didn't know that she was unlikable. Oh, but no, but it's like, for me, it's not like, I guess I don't really look at things. I certainly don't look at art and fiction in terms of likable and unlikable, in terms of the actual character, and whether or not I'm going to go along with the ride for them. It's more about, am I interested, to be with that person? And sometimes, like Tony Soprano, you're not, it's funny because for me, it's like, oh, it's an unlikable narrator. It's, okay, it's like, yes, he kills people. He does all these morally reprehensible things, obviously. But within the construct of the show, you are meant to root for him, because he's also like, we're seeing, I don't know why I took it to Tony Soprano, but that's because when it's a man, that's why, quite frankly, it's a lot more palatable. It's like, oh, he kills people, but like, he's in the mafia. It's totally cool.
It's his job.
It's his job. And for me, it's like, well, this woman might, be killing people, but look at all the shit that happened to her. It's her job at this point to survive. And so for me, that is it. I also think that if everybody acted like, I don't want to, walk around with a character narrating something that is like trying to, be demure. In fiction, it's like, I want to take the opportunity to say, I want to, I'm not trying to shock or do anything like that, but I do want to say the truest possible thing, even if it's like really scary. And I think if we went around saying the truest things to each other, we'd probably get along a lot better, but we'd also probably be like, oh my God, he's not as likable as I thought he was.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up Tony Soprano, because he's definitely like, I mean, probably everyone's sort of reference point for like a really kind of round and compelling kind of quote unquote unlikable character. Though you're right, like the men, especially white men, get to sort of inhabit that that persona with a different kind of freedom. But the talking about like a literal murder, it made me think that that collateral damage is also sort of a gendered right. And so when we see a woman who sort of leaves like ruins in her wake, that feels threatening, that feels more dangerous. But it is sort of the kind of residue of living a life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's people who live life, in a bit more of a bloody fashion. And I think, and I mean bloody metaphorically, but like, and I think Edie and Joan both are kind of, they do, if sort of like posed with a choice between total safety and something that's a little bit risky, but could lead to experience, I think they would almost always both choose that thing. And I think there's a natural disinclination to root for someone who does something that you kind of wish you had the power or the bravery to do. You're kind of like, oh God, that's, you have to judge it. You have to put it down in order to be able to have, like your sort of sense of being better than.
Yes.
I love that you brought up Tony Soprano too, because I think of him and he's not just unlikable. Like he's not Humbert, right? Who is just like an evil character and a man that does evil things and hurts people for no reason. Like he has likable qualities. He really loves animals. He is very protective of his wife and his children. And I feel like with Edie and Joan especially, it reminds me more so of like a Dexter, where yes, he does these terrible things, but they're justified, at least for most people. I mean, moral compasses are all over the place, but like he's killing serial killers. He's making the world a better place. And so there's this like level of morality that we all have to kind of decide if we're okay with. I'm personally okay with Joan's level of morality, especially as a woman. But I think, I don't know if you guys have seen The Undoing on HBO. It was on a while ago. If you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, mute me or something. But Hugh Grant plays this like very handsome, very wealthy, white, successful man. And throughout the show, so many viewers found any way for him not to be the killer. I mean, even my husband and I were talking about like, oh, it could be her, it could be this person, when right in front of you, it is so clearly him the entire time. And it felt like, Raven, like what you were saying, we find a way to let these handsome, wealthy white men off the hook. Like we're conditioned to do it and we want to do it. Whereas a show like that, it's like, they weren't trying to trick us. It seemed like it was very clear that it was him all along. And that's why I love that you guys have written these books, because I feel like flawed / real women like this are not as represented in literature. And so I felt like I identified with each of them, parts of them, so much, because that's the real female experience for so many people, I think. Hey, buddy.
Sorry, my dog. Yeah.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think like part of what you're saying is that, women are less allowed the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And benefit of the doubt, I think, goes both ways, as in like it was justified, which is actually, I don't know, entirely important to me as I write, but it also, you want to be able to give women and women on the page benefit of the doubt that they meant that bad thing that they did in only that way. And sort of that is, I think, a challenging thing, but also a deeply human thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that I don't even mind if people do things that are justified. For me, it's like I want to read the most honest rendering of a sort of human life, and I really want to see how everything adds up to why somebody would do this one thing, and to not even condemn that thing, but just to look at it forensically, like what led you from A to Z, and like a life led you from A to Z. And that's interesting to me. And I think we go around editing out like the scary, shitty parts of things. Yes. And so sometimes when you're reading it somewhere else, it's like a little bit shocking. But like, I just think that the more honest we are, it's just those things, those unlikable things. I don't know. It just, I guess for me, it's just like, I think that always making unlikable, putting unlikable with women needing to satisfy on some spectrum of that is so dangerous. To I guess I just want to see, I want to see women be bloody for a while without apology.
Yes.
That leads perfectly into my next question. There was another review that I read that mentioned both of you. And the reviewer said, quote, "Among a new generation of authors is coming to prominence. Theirs are no fucks given, visceral, pared back narratives that unspool the generational trauma that women have had to hold in and endure for centuries." And there is a lot of anger, but there's also a level of sadness in both of your books. That I think a lot of people can relate to and is very real. But I would love for you to talk about, I mean, it seems like people are holding you guys up, and other writers like Ottessa Moshfegh, who also kind of like opens things up and looks inside the dirty bits a little bit more, and is like real and visceral like that. And I'm interested in your take on that review and just why you kind of explained it a little bit, Lisa, especially just now, but like why it is important to have that going into writing and publishing, especially now, with the generational trauma for women and women of color, and how you approach that.
I think it's important to have it all, I think it's important to have writers who write quiet, Victorian stories, and writers who write, blood and guts, and writers who write about hardcore sex, and writers who write about gay, just like everything. And to not have it be, I think there's always like, it's like, let's identify the trend, and let's figure out what the next thing is. It's like, I think one of the greatest things about a bookstore or, any type of reading situation is how much there is, how many ideas there are. And I think that what we do is we try to scare people into submission, into, what needs to happen. I found this so interesting. I was talking to, with Raven about this the last time we talked, when we were talking about the idea of people calling writing, or especially women, but anything like risky, like, oh, she took all these risks, and I'm so taken with the idea of that like where that like there's that any kind of art should be a risk nowadays feels very kind of antiquated to me. And I'm excited by all the new voices, and I'm excited by all the like, I don't think that it's I guess I don't know, it's just funny how it's funny how it's I don't know. I think I lost the thread.
No, I mean, I just think that the hardest thing to do, and the thing that like we're all here for and trying to do is to tell the truth, and which is, I think, if you capture it in a way that feels that is unvarnished, and that is sort of unconcerned with the sort of kind of tidiness of whether that is moral and whether that is immoral, that you're going to kind of get these conversations around art that talk about that kind of nakedness and that earnestness in sort of terms of risk, and I do think that is like even just interpersonally a hard thing to do, to tell the truth, to be earnest, and especially about like there's a kind of there is absolutely kind of performative and trendy kind of sadness that I definitely wanted to write away from. And because that existed out there already, because there was sort of that was already out in the ether, I took enormous pains to try and write toward it in a way that felt mundane almost, like it's sort of this current that spikes throughout her day, when she's like out on her bike, or when she's, when she's having sex. And I mean, I guess that's like maybe a common place where that might kind of come up. But I wanted those, I wanted, when I sort of present that, as important that it's there, but then that it exists in a sort of a quotidian way, because I do think that writing about writing about sadness for me, a Black woman writing a Black woman character, like that was important. It was important that she be a person who could say, at least internally, in that sort of space, I'm sad. Because I do think there is this standard that we hold Black women to, that requires them to be okay, to be available for support. And so it was important that she not be okay. There be moments and mundane moments, because I do think that it is that way. It's not always raining when you're grieving. Sometimes it's sunny and you see something miraculous out on your walk, but the sadness is still there with you. And I wanted those, contradictions is the wrong word, but I wanted her to be a person who could be hurt, who could be sad, but also kind of honest about the way that is sort of truncated by the history that she's connected to. She's sad, or she's hurt, or she's horny. Like all of those things are connected to a history that she understands of her people, that she understands is ugly and violent, that almost forces her to still present that sort of human pain in a way. Well, it's not as bad as it was, when my father or my mother was coming up, and that much is true. But I wanted to be both honest about the sort of work you have to do to feel as a Black woman, sort of conditioned to be stoic, and also as a Black person who understands that however sad you are in this moment, what has existed before you is more monstrous. And all of how all of those things sort of come together to kind of influence how you feel able to express yourself. But yeah, I definitely really struggled as I was trying to present that, because it is messy, and it felt at the time, like the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up Sex Raven, and I would love to talk about how sex functions in both of your novels, because there is a lot of carnality. And Lisa, I was watching your interview with Katie Couric the other day, and she asked you something like, do you ever feel embarrassed when you're writing? Because and especially in Animal, because she was got a little flushed with some of the the graphic, for lack of a better word, scenes. But again, I do love that both of your novels feature women writing about sex from the point of view of women, and it's not like beautiful romance, rose petals, Kenny G playing in the background. It's carnal, and again, it can be violent, and there is a power struggle. I would love to talk about how sex functions in your novels, and how it was for you to write those scenes.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's not difficult to write scenes that I don't get sort of. It's exciting. I look at a sex scene as like, I want to write it in a way that does not like gross me out at all with like any of the language, like there's so many words that just really gross me out. And not gross me out like in like I'm like too prudish for it, but gross me out like just like sex, like like cheesy sex stuff. Mm-hmm. So I always look at it as like a real challenge. And that is what is exciting to me. The idea of writing it in a new way that won't make me grossed out reading about it like, 20 years later. So I get excited. It's like a challenge. That's what sex writing and sex is important in my books because it's important, in our life. It's just, but it's part of, it also says a lot about, I think that we still look at both genders through that filter so much of the time because it's so much a part of our biology that I think, for it to not be on the page would be, just like, when you get upset when someone's not going to the bathroom in a movie, that same kind of feeling.
I really, really relate. I don't think I've ever articulated this thing specifically about like what is actually personally gross about like potentially writing sex. It's not like the word moist.
Yeah.
And it's not like any of like the genital vocabulary. It is the kind of cutesy packaging of those things. It's like the curtains wafting in the wind, like that is sort of what grosses me out. And so I like try to
implication of sex, like not the actual act, but like the implication that it's happening, but we don't want to look at it.
Yes, that is sort of what it disturbs me. And so I feel like the kind of natural conclusion of that is to write right into it.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. So that is sort of how I go about it. And I think we talked about this before, but I feel like it is not just like the act, it is sort of the kind of packaging you do before you do it, and I think Lisa's book is so good on that front. I think I talked to you briefly about that line about the kind of clothes strewn on the floor, but there also is this scene where Joan is like, dressing up to see the man that she loves and is infatuated with, and sort of realizes as she's like walking to the door by the sound of her shoes that it is like garish, but like full of desire and full of need, like in the way that like we've all dressed up and sort of presented ourselves. But the kind of that evolution of walk to the door is sex. Like that walk to the door is the part of sex writing that always sort of touches me. Like the sort of the negotiations we do around that transaction, the kind of, the high stakes that sort of knock you out of your body and make you almost a student Like that's what's really exciting to me. As well as the actual deed, which I think is always like, I want to know like the technical words for things. I think those granular details make it interesting. I want to feel like I shouldn't be seeing it.
Yeah. And like, what if the experience is going to be the most sort of, if I just can have one detail to sort of delineate what the feeling was, what is that detail? That's often like the exciting thing too. Like, what do you remember from this one encounter? And it's not the thing that, it's not like the gross soppy thing that it's something else.
Well, and what's interesting in both of your books too is that the women have sex with men who they're not particularly attracted to and or don't really like, right? Whereas I feel like in a lot of books, sex is between, just two married people or two people in a relationship. Whereas it's really interesting in y'all's books because you can, especially with Joan, you can see how different it is for her when she's in it and when she's not. And this idea of engaging in a sexual act with someone that you don't even respect, I think at the most basic level, like she just doesn't even respect him, is so interesting and like adds a whole other layer to the power dynamic as well.
Yeah. What I like a lot about Edie, is that when Edie has sex, when Edie sees, it's Eric, right?
Yeah.
Okay. She has this like awareness of his kind of being less than at the very same time that she's putting him on a pedestal.
Yes.
So, and it's like right at the same time. And I think that's what's so interesting about women, not to totally generalize, but generally speaking, women are so much better at holding both the high and the low together at the same time and seeing it. And I loved seeing Edie's representation of that, because she's like, to kind of see, she almost has the regret already that she might have in 5 years about this. And then she's holding it there along with the crush. It's like really exciting.
Thank you. I mean, it was important to me that like she see his archival gloves and still like unfuck him, like that was really important to me. And like, as I was reading, every now and then Joan will say, I mean, more often than not, like, I did not orgasm and here's where I did, and so like there are like these sort of very frank sort of kind of confessions of pleasure, but also performance of that pleasure that really open up those transactions in a way that is really exciting to me. And also just the sort of conversation, like the full conversation and books that could be had in discussing the sort of utility of like of the orgasm and its place in relationships where you are both in love, or kind of disgusted, like disgust and pleasure. I think, they make really, really exciting bedmates.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
I'm going to read a question from the audience, but I want to remind everyone that if you have a question for either Lisa or Raven, put it in the Q&A space. But Sydney has a question for Lisa, and she says, Joan seems to have read my mind. At times she thinks things that I feel bad that I think. It's almost as if you saying it has made it okay for me to think it. How? Do you actually spend time on this, or do you keep a list of all the difficult thoughts? I love that question.
That question. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Sydney, for saying that, because I think that a lot of us have that thoughts, and I think that's my gamble anyway. I'm not reading your mind, Sydney. I'm reading my own, and I'm talking, all of the women that I've spoken to for 3 Women, so many of the same things came up. And I think that's the thing. It's like I'm always surprised when people are like, surprised by some of the things that any of the female characters have ever written, or the ones that I've just translated, like the ones, in my nonfiction, though we all feel so many of those things. And, there's a reason that there's a reason that I think I was so uniquely privy to it, because I was talking to these people, and I was talking to them in this kind of way where it was like I was just downloading all their information and really listening and not judging. And I think that when you just really, when you do that with people, they'll say all of that stuff. I think it just takes a lot to be honest about dark things. But I think we all have those, not necessarily those, but I think, we all share really dark thoughts. We just don't share them with each other.
But I love that. I mean, like Sydney says, I love that books have this power to make people feel validated in their own thoughts.
Yeah.
And feel like not guilty for thinking things that are actually universal, but we've been told to like repress them and not say them. I just love that idea.
Yeah. And I feel so happy that I'm able to do that for anyone. So that makes me feel really good. Thank you, Sydney. That really made my day.
I have one more question of my own, and then I will go back. People are submitting questions, so guys, definitely keep doing that. But one thing that I am especially interested in is how both of your main characters kind of forego the traditional domestic life of women and ultimately end up living in other men's homes, and they don't have a husband and they don't have kids of their own. And I think that's also something that is not often written about. And we see kind of like with the millennial generation, it's really the first generation of women who have chosen different life paths. I grew up in the South, but I am like one of the only people I went to high school with who is child free. And I've decided like, I don't want to have children. And I grappled with, do I get married? But I needed health insurance, but I don't know if I believe in the institution. And so I'm just so interested in both of these women who took these different paths, and you don't make necessarily a point of it in the book. It's just, it exists. But I would just love for you to kind of talk about that. And Joan is 36, 37. Edie is much younger, of course, but she's still, Edie flips domesticity on its head, because she goes and like lives with a functioning family, like a married couple and child, right? And so I would just love for you to talk about that concept, because I'm just so fascinated by it.
I think that it can't be like a coincidence that you just mentioned sort of health insurance, like just now as you were like asking this question. I do think that sort of, and much has been written about it and better. I always kind of struggle to find the words to talk about like the sort of millennial problem. Yeah, I know but I do think that her precarity, her sort of the deep instability of her life that is sort of made by not having a stable job or a meaningful job, or a job that she can count on having in 50 years, not having any sort of, this is also racialized, not having sort of any kind of like generational wealth.
Right.
Not having sort of, any like kind of guardians or parents, although that is like not really part of like the millennial kind of problem, but the idea of that we can sort of outsource these problems to these like menial and very low paying jobs that absolutely do not kind of help you break even or eat, kind of put the idea of a family of children very, very much in the backseat. Put the idea of like home ownership very much sort of out of reach. But there is too, I think, in the freedom that she has that the women before her did not enjoy, especially, like people within her own lineage. She can kind of go a few steps and go to like as I can, the bill of sale, that her sort of ability to look, to kind of wander, even in this sort of journey in which she's just trying to get some scratch together, but her freedom allows her to kind of to enter a house with almost a bird's eye. I would say, you know, there is an element, there's a sort of distance that both her precarity and her place in the world at this particular time allow her a distance to look at this sort of traditional framework, even though I don't think that's necessarily what she has actively done, and make make sort of assumptions on whether or not that is something she wants or something she can access. And so I do still think that there are elements of her character where she is trying to put together a kind of family. And the one that she finds is this one. She's looking for care. And because of the way her life has been shaped by these factors beyond her control, you know, the sort of instability of her time, is sort of, you know, racism and sexism of environment, that, you know, having health insurance, that sort of limits her access to these sort of traditional benchmarks, but frees her up in a way to kind of follow her, you know, her id in a different way.
Yeah, for Joan, it's I just didn't want to write about, you know, I just wanted to write about one woman and her kind of journey, and I wanted all of her attachments to have more to do with the sort of like marking why she was taking this trip rather than actually examining something that was happening in real time. I wanted the relationship in real time to be with a woman, and all of the relationships with men to be in the rear view. Not for any particular reason, other than the fact that I didn't want to concentrate on a male-female relationship, because I just wanted to do something different. So it wasn't like a choice to show a different kind of, you know, it was just something I was just more interested in doing that.
I want to get to audience questions. This is from Robert, and he addresses it to Lisa, but I'm curious, for both of you, can you talk about your writing process? Who are your influences, and how do you find a narrative to hold your attention?
My influences are very, I have a lot. I guess the writers that I admire the most, that I think, the ones that I feel the closest to just purely writing wise, are like Natalia Ginsburg, Elena Ferrante, Grace Paley. I really like I also really like horror, you know, and I like Stephen King. I like Gillian Flynn. Raven Leilani is truly one of my favorite, really, really one of my favorite writers. So I have, yeah, I mean, but it's all across the map. Most of my influences that I think about the most, that I read the most, are short story writers like Joy Williams. That's a really big thing for me. So that's more of what I read and what I am the most. I've always been the most impacted by short story writers.
I would say, I mean, off the top, and you know that I'm a fan, but I would say first Lisa, you know, like like we talked about, it is like for me, it's about the sentences, like it's about that kind of, that like soul behind the prose. That's that propulsive feeling that is really feels rare to find. And so when you find it, it is really exciting. I would say Nabokov, you know, I remember being, you know, a teenager and coming across his work for the first time, and feeling sort of bowled over by like the density of like his images, and like how deeply sensual he is on the line level, and actually how funny he is on the line level. I really love Lucille Clifton. I really love Audre Lorde, who writes one of my favorite pieces about the the kind of value of the erotic. And on that, like, I think I wouldn't have the preoccupation I have with the erotic if not for finding like Anne Rice early and Laurel K. Hamilton and like all of the sort of like fantasy genre, I guess, fiction that my parents, like, I could like sneak, didn't know I was reading, but that really kind of excited me as like a young woman who was figuring out what I liked on the page and what I liked, with my body. So I would say Katie Kitamura too. Like I joke and I say like I brought her first book to therapy, but it's true. Like I think she really is like, she's so precise. Not one word is not supposed to be there. And Zadie Smith, kind of course, all are really important to me.
Yeah, the prose in both of your books it's incredible. I mean, even take the story away, which is impossible because these are such story-driven novels. But I mean, the prose is incredible, and both of them, every page, I would be like, damn, I wish I wrote that. Like, it would be a sentence where I'm just like, oh God, how do you craft such a perfect sentence? So yes, if you are a student of prose, read these books. Barbara says, I haven't read these books yet. So Barbara, buy them today. But if I recall correctly, Luster is a debut novel. To Raven, what drew you to write this story?
So I can weirdly pinpoint like an exact moment, which is weird. But I had come back to New York for my MFA. I'd written at that point, like I'd finished 2 books that I was really excited about. And then I met with, a teacher who would become like one of my mentors. And we talked for a while, and he asked me this question, which I imagine I should have and had asked myself before I started both of those previous projects. But sometimes you need someone else to ask you. And he said, do you mean this thing that you wrote? And like, I went home, I looked at my pages and I panicked because I didn't. And so I started something new, really, truly, like frantically, like I have to write something I mean. And this is what came out. This is sort of just what came out.
That's great.
I love that. That's great advice.
Mm-hmm.
For Lisa, I'm listening to Animal now and loving it. And Emma Roberts is such a great match with your words. How did that pairing come about for the audiobook?
She emailed me and said, can I narrate your audiobook? And I
wow.
said, it was really cool. It was really exciting. I think her voice sounds fantastic with the book. And I think if you're someone who likes to listen to your books, this is, I mean, I really have to say, I'm so thrilled. It's just really a great voice. Really has a great voice.
Yeah, I listened to both of your books. Libro FM, for those who don't know, is it's an indie bookstore supported audio book platform. So if you want to go listen to them, go there. But both of your narrators felt like they were made to narrate those books. I thought they did such that. Like, now I can only hear those characters in that voice.
That's cool.
Let's see, Raven, how did you choose Rebecca's job, and what experience did you get in order to write about it? It was an exciting choice.
So my mom had that job. My mom worked as a medical examiner for a while, and at the VA, where because my dad he was a soldier, and so she was working in the VA. And before I left for college, I think, yeah, it was before I left for college, the summer before, I went to see her work in the morgue. And it was just like a miraculous experience. I remember putting on my hazmat suit. She put on her hazmat suit, and like the giant metal door opening, and just being worried that I was going to pass out and disappoint my mom. And it was just, I watched her go like, bit by bit, and kind of slowly excavate everything from the body that has to be excavated before it is like prepared. And it was just like the body is an incredible record of life. And beyond the kind of the shock of seeing, you know, that flesh and like that death, that was sort of what was exciting to me. And I didn't expect it. And it just kind of stuck with me. So when I started to write this book about art, and I knew that, you know, historically they would use cadavers, it felt right.
Wow. That's great. That's cool to know.
This is a great question to be our last question, because I like to ask this of all authors. But what have you recently enjoyed reading, and are there any future releases that you're really excited about?
Oh God.
I really, I have a few. First, I really love Katie Kitamori's Giant Intimacies. It's so good. Bolu Babalola's Love and Color, Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. Those three are, and Justine by Forsyth Harmond. Like those four are bananas.
I haven't seen that last one. What's that about?
It's sort of like a mixed media book that like it's very special because it has like both a visual component as well as sort of textual one.
Tamagotchi.
It also is like very much like about art.
Can you show me the cover one more time? Sorry, Raven. I'm just writing it down. Can you show me the cover?
Oh, Justine.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. I haven't seen that. I'm excited about it. I haven't seen it either. I have been reading Secret Lives of Church Ladies, which has been fantastic with my friend. Ebony recommended to me, and she's I don't know if she's actually coming tonight, but she's the person whose book recommendations are always 100% on point for me. I just also finished George Saunders' Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which I thought was beautiful. I'm reading Liberty, and there's a couple of others, but I'm not in my office. So
Liberty is amazing. I want to co-sign that.
And that cover is absolutely stunning. I think that's one of the nicest covers. Yes. And I'm really, you know, I mean, it's funny before like I published a book, I didn't really think too much about book covers, and I must have been thinking about them the whole time because like it had said so much. Anyway, Liberty is gorgeous. I wish I had it in front of me, but it's a beautiful cover.
Ebony says she's here. She wants you to know.
Hi. So much. She's amazing. She's actually, anyway, whatever. Ebony Booth she's a brilliant playwright and TV and film writer, and she's fantastic. And Raven, I know she's really into you, and I just wanted to. But anyway.
Shout out to Ebony. She sounds great.
Fantastic.
Thank you both so much for doing this. I mean, I couldn't gush about your books enough. I'm so excited for the 3 Women series. That is going to be amazing. I never want to ask people when they're doing book tours what they're working on next, but please come back to us whenever you come out with whatever you're doing next. Good luck, everyone. Buy these books. The links are in the chat. Again, if you're a P&P member, you get 20% off this whole weekend. But if you need some summer reading, this is it. This is all you need. You're done.
Thanks so much, Brittany. Thank you, Raven. I was awesome as always to talk to you.
This was so wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Brittany. Like, thank you for doing this whole thing.
Of course, this is a dream. Oh my gosh. All right, everyone, stay safe out there, stay well, and stay well read, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.